All right, let's dive into one of the biggest, most talked about political decisions in recent memory, Brexit. But, this isn't going to be another rehash of the Remain versus Leave debate. No. In this explainer, we're going to zero in on one single, really powerful idea that might just explain the whole thing.
And this is the question right at the heart of it. Did millions of people actually look at the potential economic downside and say, yep, that's a price worth paying? A price for what? For getting something else back? National identity, control? Or is the story a whole lot messier than that? Okay, let's get into it.
So, for our purposes, we're going to call this the Brexit Hypothesis. Basically, it frames the vote not as some kind of mistake or a misunderstanding, but as a deliberate, maybe even rational, trade. A painful one, for sure, but a conscious transaction. And throughout this explainer, we're going to put this very hypothesis to the test.
To do that, first we have to rewind the clock. Let's go back to 2016 and try to understand the choice as it was actually presented to people. What were the big economic arguments that both sides were throwing around?
And man, it was a tale of two completely different futures. On one side, you had the Remain campaign, and they were backed by pretty much every major economic voice out there warning of some really severe consequences. And then on the other side, the Leave campaign was painting this picture of a vibrant global Britain, totally unshackled and ready to take on the world. The Remain camp really built its case on these detailed, kind of scary forecasts, like this one from the UK Treasury. It was a really stark warning. Leaving the EU, they said, would make every single family, on average, thousands of pounds poor, every year. And look, this wasn't just one person's opinion, this was pretty much the consensus view among economists.
And then you have this. This was the Leave campaign's counterpunch, and it was devastatingly effective. Why? Because it was simple, it was memorable, and it was incredibly emotional. I mean, they famously plastered it on the side of a bus. It just took this super complex financial arrangement and boiled it down to a tangible promise for the NHS, which everyone in Britain loves.
But here's the thing. There was an immediate and official backlash to that number. The UK's own statistics watchdog came out and called the figure misleading, a clear misuse of the data, because, it was a gross figure. It totally ignored the big rebate Britain got back from the EU and all the other EU money spent in the UK. But even though it was officially debunked, the number had already done its job. It was out there. And this, right here, was probably the crucial turning point in the whole debate. The Treasury had also warned of this immediate, sharp recession that would happen right after a Leave vote. Well, guess what? It didn't happen. And that gave the Leave campaign this incredibly powerful weapon. They could just turn around and say, see, Project Fear was wrong about the short-term stuff, so why on earth should we believe anything they say about the long-term? That one forecasting error was used to basically blow up the credibility of the entire economic consensus. So the economic debate was, let's be honest, it was a mess. It was murky, contested. But what was really getting people to the polls? To get that, we need to stop looking at the campaigns and start looking at the voters themselves.
If you had to boil down the entire referendum to just one phrase, this was it. Take back control. I mean, it was a work of genius. It wasn't just about laws from Brussels or about money. No, it tapped into this much deeper, much more powerful feeling that the crucial decisions affecting people's lives were being made somewhere far away by forces they couldn't see or influence.
And when you actually look at the data on why people voted the way they did, the picture becomes crystal clear. All those economic arguments we were just talking about? They were secondary. For a huge majority of Leave voters, we're talking 73% of those who were concerned about it, the number one issue was immigration, which for them was all part of that bigger feeling of losing control over their own borders.
The referendum also just ripped the lid off these deep, deep divides in British society. And this chart, wow, it illustrates the starkest one perfectly. The single best predictor of how someone would vote was their level of education. There was a massive 30-point gap in Leave support between folks with lower-level qualifications and university graduates. Just huge.
Age was another one of these massive fault lines. Younger people, by and large, overwhelmingly wanted to stay in the EU. But support for Leave was really concentrated among the older generations. So the vote wasn't just a political choice, it was a generational one.
But to really get inside the mindset here, we have to go even deeper than just age and education. After the vote, researchers uncovered this fascinating psychological link.
It's this concept from psychology called external locus of control. And what it means is, it's the feeling that you don't really have control over your own life. That powerful outside forces are the ones calling the shots. Now, think back to that slogan, take back control.
It hit home so hard because it spoke directly to this feeling of powerlessness that was already there. So the real question becomes, was this a calculated economic choice, or was it more of a psychological cry for help?
Okay, we've looked at the debate, we've looked at the voters' motivations. Now let's fast forward to the aftermath. Enough time has passed now that we can move away from all those forecasts and start looking at the cold, hard facts. What has the economic impact actually been?
Now, this is the really big challenge for economists, right? How in the world do you separate the impact of Brexit from these other massive global events, like the pandemic or the war in Ukraine? Well, the solution they came up with is actually incredibly clever. They decided to build a doppelganger, a kind of synthetic twin version of the UK.
So here's how they do it. It's pretty cool. First, the researchers find a bunch of other countries whose economies were on an almost identical path to the UK's, but before 2016. Then they sort of blend those countries together into a weighted average, and that creates a virtual UK that never actually had Brexit. Finally, they just compare how the real UK has performed since 2016 to how its doppelganger has. And that difference between the two, well, that is the Brexit effect.
And the results from this method are, well, they're pretty stark. One major study found that by the middle of 2022, the UK's real economy was already lagging 5% behind its synthetic twin. That suggests a really significant and measurable economic cost that you can trace directly back to Brexit.
And this gap in GDP, it's driven by a few key things. Business investment, which is so crucial for any country's future growth, basically flatlined for 6 years after the vote. The UK's overall trade, as a slice of its economy, has fallen behind its peers in the G7, and trade in actual goods has been hit especially hard by all the new barriers. But, it's not all bad news. The UK's world-class services sector has proven to be incredibly tough and resilient through all this.
Okay, so we've looked at the debate, the voters, and the economic data. It's time to bring it all back together now and return to that original hypothesis. Was this a conscious choice to trade wealth for sovereignty? Let's weigh the evidence.
Let's break it down, scorecard style. First up, was it a conscious, calculated choice? The evidence suggests probably not. The single biggest economic argument for leave was misleading, and all that psychological data points to a vote that was more emotional, more expressive. Okay, second, did voters knowingly accept economic hardship? Again, the evidence here is pretty weak. The constant warnings from economists weren't really accepted as a necessary price to pay. They were mostly dismissed as project fear. But third, was it all about protecting identity and sovereignty? On this one, the answer is a resounding yes. This was absolutely a primary driver, captured perfectly by that one powerful slogan, take back control.
And so we end up right back where we started, but maybe with a bit more clarity. The Brexit hypothesis, that idea of a rational trade-off, it doesn't seem to fully stack up against the evidence. It looks less like a cold calculation on a spreadsheet and more like a powerful emotional roar from parts of a country that felt left behind, forgotten, and powerless. A vote cast not for a specific economic destination, but simply against a world that felt like it was spinning out of control.